The sky over Seoul turned dark at noon, not the dark of clouds, not the dark of a storm. It was the dark of something so enormous that it blocked out the sun the way a mountain blocks out the wind. People stopped walking. Drivers stopped their cars in the middle of the road. Children pressed their faces against classroom windows and stared upward with open mouths. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire city went quiet in a way that no city of 12 million people had any right to be quiet. Then the broadcast started. Every screen on Earth, every phone, every television, every public display, every military monitor in every government building turned on at the same moment. The image was the same everywhere, a tall, dark figure standing against a background of cold stars. Its body was covered in hard, scaled armor the color of dried blood. Its eyes were flat and yellow, like the eyes of something that had never learned to feel. And its voice, translated into every human language simultaneously by a system that should not have existed yet, was calm in the way that a blade is calm before it cuts. "We are the Vorkai Dominion," the figure said. "We have observed your species for 37 of your planetary cycles. We have completed our assessment. By the biological and technological classification standards of the Dominion, your species has been designated as Prey Class 4. This classification carries with it a full set of legal rights and obligations under Dominion law. You will be informed of those obligations in due course." The broadcast ended. For 6 seconds, Earth was completely silent. Then everything broke at once. Governments tried to scramble fighter jets. The jets were turned back by a containment field that wrapped around every major military installation on the planet within minutes. Emergency calls flooded every defense network. World leaders tried to reach each other and found that their encrypted communication lines had been replaced. Quietly, invisibly, sometime in the past week, by a Vorkai monitoring system that let them speak to each other freely because it no longer mattered what they said. Park Si-yeon was 29 years old that day. She was a junior strategic analyst for the Korean Defense Intelligence Bureau, sitting in a concrete briefing room 3 levels underground in a facility outside Chuncheon. She had a cold cup of coffee on the desk in front of her and a tactical readout on her screen that had stopped updating 30 seconds ago, because the satellites feeding it had gone offline, one by one, cleanly and without drama, like lights being switched off in an empty house. She did not panic. She watched the broadcast on the small screen mounted to the wall of the briefing room. She watched the flat yellow eyes. She listened to the calm, cutting voice. She noted the words, assessment, classification, legal rights, obligations, and she understood immediately what those words meant when arranged in that order by something that had ships large enough to block out the sun. They were not here to talk. They were not here to trade or explore or make contact in any of the ways that human science fiction had imagined for 100 years. They were here because they had already decided what humans were, and now they were here to act on that decision. Si-yeon picked up her cold coffee. She drank it slowly. She stared at the blank screen after the broadcast ended. And somewhere very deep inside her, in a place that did not shake even when the world above her was shaking, she made a decision that was less a decision than a direction. A single quiet turn of everything she was toward a single fixed point in the future. She was going to make them regret this. She did not say it out loud. She did not write it down. She just held it, the way you hold something fragile and precious that you do not want to drop, and she went back to work. The submission accords were signed 14 days later. The negotiations, if you could call them that, lasted less than an hour. Earth's leaders sat across a long table from 3 Vorkai representatives who had no visible interest in anything the humans said. Every argument was ignored. Every counterproposal was dismissed with the same flat phrase: the classification is final. The Vorkai did not want land. They did not want resources in any form that humans had expected. What they wanted was codified in 37 pages of dense legal language that came down in plain terms to a handful of brutal facts. Human beings living in the inner colonies, Earth, Mars, and the 4 closest inhabited moons, would be left largely undisturbed, so long as they made no military expansions and paid a regular biological tithe. Humans in the outer colonies had no such protection. The outer colonies were open. Vorkai hunting parties could operate freely. Vorkai science teams had full access for research purposes. Any human captured in outer colonial space became, under Dominion law, a legally classified piece of biological property. The word slave did not appear once in the 37 pages. It did not need to. The accords were signed. The leaders who signed them did so with shaking hands and dead eyes. Some of them told their people it was a temporary measure, a survival strategy. Humanity needed time. Some of them believed that when they said it. Some of them did not, but they all signed. And the Vorkai left 3 warships in orbit around Earth, not to threaten, their representative explained, but simply as a reminder of the classification. a reminder of what humans were according to the law of the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever produced. The raids on the outer colonies started within a month. Kong Jehun was 19 years old and living on Callisto Station when they came. Callisto was one of Jupiter's moons, small and cold and far enough from Earth that the people there had always lived with a particular kind of toughness. Not the violent kind, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing that if something goes wrong, help is a long way away. The Vorkai ships came without warning. They came at night, local time, when the station's lights were dimmed and most of its 4,000 residents were asleep. Ji-hoon was in the maintenance bay, running a late repair shift on a water recycling unit, when the emergency klaxon went off. He ran to the main corridor and found it full of people running in the wrong direction, running toward the docking bays, where the Vorkai boarding teams were already cutting through the outer doors. He was captured in the first hour. He spent 3 years as a classified piece of Vorkai biological property. He worked in a mineral extraction facility on a moon so far from Earth that the sun was just a bright star in the sky. He watched people break. He watched people die. He watched the Vorkai move through the human work gangs with the same casual authority that a farmer moves through a field. Not cruel for pleasure, most of them, just completely indifferent. The indifference was worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least acknowledged that you were something. Indifference said you were nothing at all. He escaped in his 3rd year. He would not talk about how, not for a long time, not to most people. What he would say, in the years that followed, was that 3 things kept him alive in that facility: anger, patience, and the absolute unshakable belief that someone on Earth was not accepting this, that someone somewhere was building something. He was right. Project Retaliation had no official name for the first 2 years. It existed as a series of encrypted budget lines inside 3 different government defense programs, all of them classified at a level so high that fewer than 40 people on Earth knew all 3 existed at once. It had no building, it had no staff list, it had no director. Then Park Se-yeon became its director, and it had all 3. She worked with the quiet intensity of someone who understood that the most important thing she would ever do was also the thing that, if done wrong, would mean there was no future in which to regret it. She gathered the best minds she could find. Not the most famous, not the most celebrated, but the ones who were angry enough to work without sleep and smart enough to channel that anger into something useful. Dr. Han Minjin was the first person she recruited. He was a materials physicist from Daejeon who had spent the past year locked in his university office reverse engineering fragments of Vorkai hull plating recovered from a disabled scout ship that had crashed on Titan. He had filled 40 notebooks with observations and conclusions that his colleagues thought were too radical to publish. Se-yeon read all 40 notebooks in a single night and knocked on his office door the next morning. "I want to build something," she said. "That will make them remember they were wrong." Han Minjin looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his notebooks and followed her out of the building. The hidden shipyards were constructed in phases over 5 years on the dark side of the moon. They were built underground, below the lunar surface, in tunnels carved by automated drilling machines that operated in complete radio silence. The materials were moved in shipments disguised as routine lunar mining operations. Every person involved signed documents that did not legally exist and understood that if any of this was discovered, the Vorkai would not just punish the project, they would punish Earth. That understanding did not slow anyone down. If anything, it made them faster. Ambassador Lee Ji-yeon was the one who bought them the time they needed. She was Earth's official diplomatic face to the Vorkai, a role that required her to sit in rooms with beings who viewed her as property, and to smile and speak calmly and show no hatred, no fear, no contempt. She was extraordinarily good at it. She asked questions that delayed decisions. She raised procedural concerns that added months to every Vorkai administrative process. She sent reports and filed requests and proposed frameworks that the Vorkai technically had to respond to under their own legal code. And the responding took time, and the time was exactly what Se-yeon needed. Lee Ji-yeon smiled at the Vorkai for 10 years. Nobody who knew what she was doing ever forgot that. On the morning of March 14, 2041, Park Se-yeon stood in the command center of the primary lunar shipyard and looked at the readout on the main display. 312 warships, fully armed, fully crewed, built from human engineering and improved Vorkai technology, and 10 years of fury that had been refined carefully into something cold and precise and ready. Beside her stood Commander Kong Jehun, who had returned to Earth 6 years ago, who had walked into a military recruitment office with scars on his hands, and a look in his eyes that made the recruiting officer reach for the phone immediately to call someone more senior. He had risen through Project Retaliation's ranks with a speed that surprised everyone except the people who had looked into his eyes. "Ready?" Cian asked him. He did not look at the display. He was already looking at the exit corridor, at the path that led to his ship. "I've been ready for 10 years, he said. Cian nodded. She turned back to the display. She looked at the 312 ships one more time. Then she straightened her collar, walked to her command station, and gave the order that 10 years of silence had been building toward. "Launch all fleets," she said. "Operation Retaliation begins now." 312 human warships moved out of the dark side of the moon and turned for the first time toward the enemy. 10 years ago, the Vorkai had looked at humanity and seen prey. They were about to find out how wrong they had been. The Vorkai border station at Reach Point 7 had existed for 9 years. It was a standard monitoring and control node, the kind the Dominion built in every sector they controlled. It had a crew of 400 Vorkai personnel, a complement of 12 patrol ships, 2 heavy gunships for enforcement operations, and a communication array powerful enough to reach the Dominion's home system in less than 30 seconds. It was not a combat station, it was an administrative one. There was no reason to make it a combat station. Nothing in this sector had ever threatened it. The station commander, a senior officer named Veth, was reviewing routine reports when the proximity sensors began screaming. He looked at the display. He looked at it again. He called his sensor operator over and asked if the system had malfunctioned. The sensor operator checked twice and said no. The system was functioning perfectly. What the display was showing was simply not possible. 47 human ships had dropped out of faster-than-light transit directly in front of the station. They were in close formation, which showed coordination. They were running on shields that the station's systems could not classify, which showed technology the Dominion's intelligence division had not recorded humans possessing. And they were already moving into attack positions, which showed intent. Veth's hand was reaching for the emergency alert panel when the first volley hit. The human weapons were different from what the Dominion had encountered before. Standard prey-class species that managed to build weapons of some kind typically produced slow, high-energy projectiles or basic particle beams, powerful enough to be dangerous but easy to anticipate. These were neither. The weapons that hit Reach Point 7 moved in unpredictable patterns, changing direction in flight, splitting into multiple smaller charges mid-course, and striking the station's shielding at angles specifically calculated to overwhelm the regeneration cycle before it could compensate. Dr. Han Min-jun had spent 7 years studying every weakness in Vorkai shield technology. The weapons he designed were not built to overpower those shields. They were built to confuse them, to hit them in the places and sequences that the shield systems were least prepared for. The station's shields failed in 4 minutes. The station itself lasted 9. At that same moment, 600 light-seconds away, Commander Kong Ji-hoon's First Strike Fleet came out of transit at the edge of the Vorkai's primary border defense line. Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the ESV Unyielding, Earth's flagship, named for what humanity had been for 10 years. He watched the tactical display with the quiet attention of someone who had rehearsed this moment so many times in his mind that it felt less like a battle beginning and more like a memory being confirmed. The Vorkai border fleet was larger than his. They had 109 ships to his 80, bigger ships on average, more heavily armed by the raw numbers. And they were scrambling to respond to the sudden appearance of a human fleet in a location where, according to everything they knew about human capability, no human fleet should have been able to reach. That confusion was the first weapon. "All ships full formation advance," Ji-hoon said. "Target priority as ordered. Fire on my command." The Unyielding moved forward, and the fleet moved with it. 80 ships in a layered wedge formation that Han Min-jun's team had spent 3 years designing. A formation built specifically to counter the Vorkai's preferred engagement patterns, to force their fleet commanders into tactical decisions that their training had not prepared them for. The Vorkai border commander, a veteran of 11 campaigns against 9 different species, recognized within the first 30 seconds of engagement that something was wrong. Not wrong in the sense that he was losing, not yet. Wrong in the sense that the battle was not behaving the way it should. The humans were not advancing recklessly. They were not making the errors that less experienced species made in their first real fleet engagements. They were moving with the controlled precision of an enemy that had trained for exactly this confrontation against exactly this opponent. He sent an emergency signal to the Dominion command network and prepared his fleet to fight. He was a capable commander. His crews were trained and experienced. They fought hard. The battle lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes, which was longer than most people in the human fleet had expected. But the outcome was never truly in doubt, because the Vorkai commander was fighting a battle he understood, while Ji-hoon's fleet was fighting a battle it had been specifically built to win. When it was over, 41 Vorkai ships had been destroyed, 31 had been disabled and captured, and 37 had broken formation and retreated in the direction of the Dominion's interior. Ji-hoon had lost 9 ships. He had not wanted to lose any. He had planned not to lose any. But 9 out of 80 against an enemy fleet of 109 in a straight engagement. Even Han Minjin, who was watching the battle data in real time from the Lunar Command Center, went quiet when the numbers came in. Ji-hoon's communications officer flagged him. "Commander, we have a transmission lock on the Dominion's primary border command frequency. Admiral Park's authorization for the message is confirmed." Ji-hoon had written the message himself. He had written it 11 times over the past year, changing small things each time, trying to find the exact weight of words that carried what he wanted to say without anything extra, without anything that weakened it. He was satisfied with the final version. It was short. "Transmit," he said. The message went out on the Dominion's own primary command frequency, in the Vorkai's own language, to every military installation and command center they operated in this sector. It said, "10 years ago, you called us prey. We have spent 10 years preparing our response. This is the first part of it. There are more parts. You should prepare yourselves, but we do not think preparation will help you." High Lord Zarak received the message 4 hours later. He was in the primary council chamber of the Vorkai Dominion's home system, overseeing what had been scheduled as a routine policy meeting, when the emergency communication from the border sectors arrived. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he looked at his senior military advisor, a hulking Vorkai general named Drosk, and he said nothing for a very long time. The battle reports came in while he was still reading the human's message. Reach Point 7 gone. The border fleet at Corridor 9 destroyed. The monitoring stations at 5 additional positions along the human sector boundary gone, all of them, within the same 4-hour window. Simultaneously. Not one after another at the same time, which meant this was not a raid and it was not a lucky strike. It was a planned, coordinated military operation of a scale and precision that the human species was not supposed to be capable of. General Drosk spoke first. "A misreport," he said. "The humans do not have this capacity. The border commanders must be." "The border commanders are dead," Zarak said quietly. "You cannot misreport from the dead." The chamber was very still. Zarak read the message one more time. He focused on the last line. "We do not think preparation will help you." He recognized what that line was. It was not a taunt. It was not the emotional outburst of a prey species that had gotten lucky in a first engagement. It was a professional assessment delivered with professional confidence by someone who believed it completely because they had the data to support it. He looked at General Drosk. "How long to mobilize the 7th War Fleet?" 6 days. "Maybe 5 if 5 days," Zarak said. "Send the 7th War Fleet, all of it. I want the human fleet command destroyed. I want whatever shipyards they have been hiding found and eliminated. I want this ended quickly." He set the message down. His yellow eyes were flat and still. "They are prey," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had said something true 10,000 times and never had reason to doubt it. "Prey that has grown teeth, but teeth do not change what something is." No one in the council chamber said anything. Most of them believed him. A few of them, the ones who had read the battle reports most carefully, were not sure they did, but none of them said so. Admiral Park Si-yeon received the intelligence report on the Vorkai's response 6 hours after the first strike was completed. She was in the Lunar Command Center, sitting with a team of 12 analysts who had been monitoring every Vorkai communication channel they had managed to tap over the past 3 years. The news that the 7th War Fleet was being mobilized did not surprise her. She had expected it. She had in fact planned for it, with the same careful thoroughness that she planned for everything. "They're sending the 7th, her communications director said. "All of it." "Good," Si-yeon said. Her communications director looked at her. "Good?" "We need them to commit their best assets early," she said. She pulled up the tactical projection for the 7th War Fleet's likely route and overlaid it with the defensive grid that the 2nd and 3rd human fleets had spent the last 48 hours moving into position along. The projection showed what she had hoped it would show. The 7th War Fleet's most probable advance route passed through 3 separate zones where human forces were already waiting, dug in and ready, in positions the Vorkai's long-range scouts would not identify until it was too late to matter. She had not built a fleet for a single battle. She had built a campaign. Every strike, every response, every position, they were all connected, like a mechanism that had been assembled piece over 10 years and was now, for the first time, fully in motion. She looked at the faces of the 12 analysts around her. They were tired. They had been running at maximum effort for 30 hours. They looked like people who understood, clearly and fully, what was at stake in every decision they made. She was proud of them in a way that she did not say out loud, because there was still work to do and sentiment was a thing for later. "Tell the 2nd and 3rd Fleets to hold positions," she said, "and get me a line to Commander Ji-hoon. I want his status and I want his assessment of the enemy's response time in his sector." She turned back to the projection display and began reviewing the next phase of the operation. In 5 days, the Vorkai's best war fleet would come looking for what they thought was a prey species that had gotten lucky. They would find something else entirely. The Vorkai 7th War Fleet was the most powerful military force in the Dominion's arsenal. It had broken the Sulhari Collective in 6 weeks. It had ended the Preth Uprising in 11 days. It had smashed the last coordinated resistance of the Dorkai Confederation, 40 ships, some of the best fighters the Confederation had ever produced, in a single afternoon. General Drosk had commanded the 7th for 12 years, and in those 12 years it had never once failed to do what it was sent to do. He was confident. He had read the battle reports from the border sectors carefully, and he had noticed things in those reports that he felt his fellow council members had missed. Yes, the humans had struck quickly and simultaneously. Yes, they had shown better technology than expected. But the 7th War Fleet had 280 ships, heavy cruisers, strike carriers, and the 3 dreadnoughts that had never been touched in combat. The humans, based on all available intelligence, had at most 300 ships, and many of those were likely lighter classes. In a straight engagement, numbers and weight of armor would decide it, the way they always did. Drosk was so confident that he did not send scouts ahead of his main formation. That was the mistake that Siu Yan had counted on. The 7th War Fleet entered the Helix Corridor, a region of dense stellar dust clouds that was the fastest route between Vorkai core space and the human border sectors. At full advance speed, it was a good route. Fast, navigationally reliable, and the dust clouds disrupted certain kinds of long-range detection, which worked in the 7th's favor when approaching an enemy position. It also disrupted the 7th's own long-range detection. What Drosk's fleet did not see, until they were already inside the corridor, was that the human 2nd Fleet was positioned along the corridor's southern wall, running completely dark. No engine emissions, no active sensors, nothing that the 7th's forward detection systems could identify through the dust. 86 ships, silent and waiting. The human 3rd Fleet was at the corridor's exit point, spread across a 300,000-kilometer defensive line that covered every viable exit vector. 91 ships. And ahead of the 7th, moving slowly and visibly as if falling back in retreat, were 22 human ships from a fast attack squadron, decoys, moving just fast enough to stay out of easy weapons range, drawing the 7th forward into the corridor's deepest point. Commander Kang Ji-hoon was not part of this phase. Si-Yeon had ordered him to hold position at the captured border fleet's former headquarters and begin the process of establishing a human command presence in the sector. He had not liked that order. He had said so plainly. Si-Yeon had looked at him with an expression that ended the conversation, and he had stayed. Instead, this battle was commanded by Fleet Captain Young Daeon, a quiet woman from Busan who had spent 8 years as a civilian cargo pilot before Project Retaliation recruited her, and who had a talent for spatial thinking that Han Minjun described as genuinely frightening. She watched the 7th enter the trap from the bridge of her flagship, running silent with the rest of the 2nd Fleet against the corridor wall, and she counted. She counted the Vorkai ships as they passed her position. She counted the intervals between their formation groups. She counted the distance to the corridor's deepest point, where the decoy squadron was still drawing them in. When the last Vorkai cruiser had passed her position, and the entire 7th War Fleet was inside the corridor, she pressed the transmit key on her command console. "All ships," she said quietly, "full power. Fire." The next 4 hours were the most intense space combat humanity had ever been part of. The 7th War Fleet was good. Drosk was a real commander, and the moment he understood the trap, he responded with speed and precision, breaking his fleet into 3 engagement groups, ordering the heaviest ships to form a fighting withdrawal toward the corridor's exit while lighter craft turned to engage the 2nd Fleet coming from behind. He was trying to collapse the trap from the inside, to create enough disorder in both human fleets that his ships could fight their way through. It almost worked. The 2nd Fleet took serious damage in the first hour. 6 human ships were destroyed outright, and 11 more were disabled badly enough that they had to be pulled from the engagement. Drosk's tactic of concentrating fire on individual human ships before moving to the next, wearing them down one by one instead of spreading fire, was tactically sound and was costing Daeon ships she could not afford to lose. Then Han Minjin's secondary weapon system activated. The system was called a phase disruptor. It had taken Han Minjin 4 years to build and 2 more years to properly calibrate. It worked by targeting the quantum resonance field that Vorkai shield systems used as their foundational layer. the field that every other shield function depended on. It did not destroy shields. It interrupted the foundational field for 0.8 seconds, which caused a cascade failure in every other shield function during that window, which was more than enough time for conventional weapons to hit unshielded hull plating directly. The phase disruptors had been kept completely offline until this moment. The Vorkai's intelligence on human technology had never recorded them. When they activated across the second and third fleets simultaneously, and Vorkai shields began failing in E.8-second pulses that their system operators could not understand or counter, the battle changed. Drosk saw 4 of his heavy cruisers lose shields and take direct hull strikes within 90 seconds of each other. He sent urgent queries to his engineering teams. The answers that came back were not answers. His engineers did not know what was happening. They reported sensor readings that contradicted each other, and shield regeneration cycles that were failing in patterns that matched no known weapon system in the Dominion's library. He pulled the heavy cruisers back. He reorganized. He was still trying to find the corridor exit. But the third fleet was waiting at the exit, and the third fleet now had phase disruptors running. The seventh war fleet retreated. It was not a rout. Drosk maintained enough order that roughly half his fleet made it back out of the Helix corridor in a coherent formation. But that half was badly damaged. Many of those ships were running on reserve systems, and the 3 dreadnoughts that had never been touched in combat. 2 of them had deep hull breaches. They would not be fighting again for months. Of the 7th's 280 ships, 94 had been destroyed. 61 had been captured by human boarding teams or had simply stopped fighting and transmitted surrender signals. A thing that Vorkai military ships were not supposed to be able to do, because surrender was not a concept that existed in Vorkai military protocol. But when phase disruptors killed your shields and you watched 3 ships around you come apart, concepts that did not exist had a way of becoming real very quickly. Humanity had lost 31 ships. 31 against the Dominion's most powerful war fleet. Dayon filed her battle report with Admiral Sion without comment. The numbers spoke for themselves. In the Dominion's council chamber, the silence was different now. When the reports from the Helix corridor came in, nobody in the chamber said anything for a very long time. General Drosk, transmitting from his damaged flagship, gave his report in the flat, controlled voice of a military professional who was managing his own shock with every word. He described the ambush. He described the phase disruptors. He described the human fleet's coordination, their positioning, their patience in waiting for the entire 7th to be inside the corridor before attacking. This was not improvised, Drosk said. This operation was planned over a long period. The humans had foreknowledge of our response protocols, our fleet routing preferences, and our formation doctrine. They used that knowledge to construct a battle that they had already won before we entered the corridor. High Lord Zarek listened without expression. When Drosk finished, Zarek did not speak immediately. He looked down at the table in front of him. The table was made from the processed hull of the first ship he had ever commanded, a decorative choice that was traditional for Vorkai High Lords. It was beautiful, dark, and hard. How long to rebuild the 7th to combat readiness, he asked. Drosk paused before answering. 4 months. Possibly 5. What fleets remain at full readiness? The 4th is at 70%. The 9th is intact but deployed in the Sulhari sector. Call back the 9th, Zarek said, and convene the full military council. I want every available asset assessed for immediate deployment. One of the council members, a civilian administrator named Vek, who had managed the human sector's resource operations for the past 8 years, raised his head. High Lord, may I speak? Zarek looked at him. The humans have demonstrated a level of military preparation that we did not assess as possible, Vek said carefully. Our classification of this species was based on data that is now demonstrably incorrect. The standard response protocol in cases where intelligence data proves incorrect is, I know the protocol, Zarek said. Then you know that we are required to reassess the classification. If humans are no longer Prey Class 4, then the submission accords and all associated. The classification stands, Zarek said. Vek stopped. He looked at the High Lord. He had the expression of someone who wanted to say more and understood that saying more would not go well. The classification stands, Zarek repeated, because I say it stands. What they have done is significant. I am not dismissing it. But they won 2 battles. 2 battles against an empire that has fought 10,000. They have good weapons and good planners. This does not change what they are. We will adapt, and we will end this. He stood. The council rose with him. Prepare the 9th Fleet for immediate departure, he said, and begin the response protocol for species that have exceeded their prey classification. I want every human colony and outer space assets put on lockdown. No movement, no communication. If they want a war, we will give them one, the kind of war we have given 43 species before them. the kind they did not survive. Park Seo-yeon received the intelligence on the Dominion's response to the Helix corridor within 6 hours. She read the part about the colony lockdown. She read it twice. Her jaw tightened very slightly. "They're going to use the outer colony prisoners as leverage," her intelligence chief said. "Standard Vorkai protocol for species resistance. They've done it before. They lock down the slave facilities, cut off all outside contact, and threaten mass termination if the resisting species continues operations." "How many humans are currently in outer colonial detention facilities?" Seo-yeon asked. "Our last confirmed count was 43,000. Real number is probably higher." Seo-yeon was quiet for a moment. She had known this was coming. She had planned for it. The plan did not make the number easier to hear. "Then we moved to Phase 3, she said. "Now, not in 2 weeks now. Tell Ji-hoon to prepare his assault teams. We are going to Durak." She looked at the star map. Durak was a slave world in Vorkai territory, the largest human detention facility in the sector, where estimates put the population of human prisoners at somewhere between 8 and 15,000. It was deep inside Vorkai space. Getting there would be difficult and costly. Getting there was not optional. "If Zurich wants to use our people against us," she said, "then we are going to make sure our people are not there to be used." She turned to the communication station. "Get every fleet on the new timeline. We are not waiting anymore. We are going in." Durak was not a planet that had been built for human beings. It was cold in the way that places far from their sun are cold, not dramatically, not dangerously, but persistently and without mercy, the kind of cold that gets into joints and stays there. Its sky was a dull orange-gray, lit by a distant star that provided light without warmth. The ground was mostly flat and covered in a grayish mineral dust that got into everything and smelled faintly of copper. It had been a mining colony once, operated by a species the Vorkai had absorbed 300 years ago. Now it was a processing and holding facility for organic assets, the Dominion's legal language for what was kept in the long, low buildings that covered the facility's interior, surrounded by 3 perimeter fences and 17 guard towers. Kang Ji-hoon had been briefed on Durak's layout so many times that he could draw it from memory with his eyes closed. He had studied the guard rotations, the communication protocols, the response times of the facility's quick reaction teams. He knew where the main power junctions were. He knew where the medical center was. He knew which buildings held the largest number of human prisoners and which guard positions had the best line of sight on those buildings. He had not known he would be coming here until 3 days ago, when Admiral Seo-yeon had moved Phase 3 forward. He had not complained about the acceleration. He had simply taken the updated briefing materials and spent the 3 days in transit running scenarios with his assault team commanders until all of them were certain of every step of the operation. Certainty saved lives, uncertainty cost them. He had learned that the hard way, in a different facility, in a different life. The operation at Durak began with the fleet engagement in Durak's orbit. The facility was defended by 2 Vorkai cruisers and a small orbital station. They were not combat-hardened vessels. They were security assets, suited to dealing with any prisoner transport issues or external threats at the level of a small rebel faction. They were completely unprepared for 4 human warships, running phase disruptors and moving at attack speed, coming out of transit in their orbital zone. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. Both cruisers were disabled, not destroyed. Ji-hoon had given specific orders that minimal lethal force was to be used unless absolutely necessary. The orbital stations was seized and its communications array was jammed. No signal went out to the Dominion's interior command network. The facility below did not know what was happening in orbit. Then Ji-hoon's dropships went down. There were 24 dropships carrying 840 soldiers. They came in fast and low, using the planetary geography to mask their approach from the facility's ground-based sensors. The first 4 ships hit the perimeter fence generators before the ground crew knew they were there, taking out the fence in sections. The next 8 ships landed inside the perimeter, disgorging soldiers who moved immediately to the guard towers and the main gate control centers. The Vorkai facility guards numbered 300. Some of them fought. Most of them, confronted with a sudden and organized assault by humans carrying weapons they had never seen before from an outside force that had clearly planned every step of this operation with precision, surrendered faster than their training suggested they should. There is a specific kind of shock that comes from discovering that the thing you assumed was small and manageable is neither. And it does something to the decision-making of even trained soldiers. The facility's inner doors were opened by the control center team within 11 minutes of the first dropship landing. Ji-hoon went in on foot. The first building he entered held 312 people. They were in a large communal space, a holding area, not cells, because keeping prey-class assets in individual cells was inefficient. They were sitting or lying on the floor in groups, most of them in the gray facility-issue clothing that had replaced whatever they had been wearing when they were taken. Some of them had heard the sounds of the assault and were pressed against the far wall. Some of them were standing, watching the door with the tense, wary attention of people who had learned not to trust sudden changes. When the door opened and a human soldier walked through it wearing armor marked with Earth's flag, a design that had been quietly changed sometime in the last year to include a new element, a deep navy field with the planet's outline, and, below it, a single word in 12 languages that had replaced the old United Nations emblem. Many of the people in the room did not react immediately, not from indifference, from a kind of protective numbness that the mind builds around hope when hope has been dangerous for too long. Then a woman near the back of the room said something that was barely audible. She said it in Korean, and it was only 2 words, and Ji-hoon, who was close enough to hear it, translated them to himself automatically. They came. After that, it was not quiet anymore. Ji-hoon did not speak. He had planned several things to say when he walked into the first building. He had thought about those words carefully. But when the moment came, there was nothing to say that was equal to the sound in that room, so he said nothing. He just stood at the door and made sure the path out was clear. The liberation of Duroc took 6 hours. Every building was cleared. Every prisoner was accounted for. The medical teams that had come with the assault force moved through the facility, identifying those who needed immediate care, which was most of them, not from acute injury, but from the compound damage of years of inadequate food, inadequate rest, inadequate medical attention, and the specific kind of harm that is done to a person when they are treated, consistently and systematically, as something that has no right to comfort or care. The number of human prisoners at Duroc was 9,614. 9,614 people who had been taken from Earth's outer colonies, from transport ships, from cargo vessels, from stations and outposts that the submission accords had placed outside the zone of protection. Most of them had been in the facility for years. Some had been there since the first year of the accords. A few of them, the ones with the quietest eyes and the most careful way of moving, had been there almost as long as the accords themselves. Ji-hoon found one of them in the medical building. She was sitting on a cot, letting a medic treat a wound on her forearm that had not been properly cleaned in weeks. Her name, he learned from the intake processor, was Shin Bomi. She had been taken from Callisto Station in the same raid that had taken him. She was 32 years old now. She looked older. Callisto, he said. She looked up at him. Year 1, she said. Me too, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the Earth flag on his armor. I didn't think anyone was coming, she said. Her voice was flat and very tired. I thought about it. I told myself to keep thinking about it. But after a while, she stopped. I know, Ji-hoon said. She nodded slowly. She looked back at the medic working on her arm. Are there more, she asked? Other facilities? Yes, Ji-hoon said. We're going to all of them. Admiral Park Se-yeon had made a decision before the Duroc operation launched. She had debated it with her communications team for 2 hours and ultimately overruled the objections because she believed, not just hoped but believed, that she was right about what it would do. She opened the liberation of Duroc to the galaxy-wide communication network, every major channel, every frequency that other species monitored. She broadcast the footage from the dropship cameras, the facility cameras, and the helmet cameras of Ji-hoon's soldiers in real time. 9 hours of footage, from the first dropship landing to the final building cleared, with full audio, subtitled in 12 languages, and 4 additional alien communication formats. The Vorkai immediately tried to block the broadcast. They were partially successful in their own controlled sectors. But the network did not run only through space the Dominion controlled, and there were receiver systems operated by other species. Species the Dominion had conquered, species the Dominion managed as client states, species that sat nervously on the Dominion's borders and had been watching the past week's events with growing, carefully concealed attention that picked up and rebroadcast the signal before any suppression effort could stop it. By the time Se-yeon's team finished the transmission, the footage had reached every inhabited system within 400 light-years. The response was not immediate, it was not loud, but it was real. Intelligence reports began coming in over the next 48 hours. Quiet inquiries on back-channel frequencies from 3 client species of the Dominion asking for information about humanity's military operations. A formal communication from the Dorkai Confederation's remnant government. Not an offer of alliance, not yet. Just a communication establishing that a channel existed. And from 6 different independent monitoring agencies operating in neutral space, statements of record noting that the human military operation at Duroc had involved no destruction of Vorkai civilian infrastructure, and had resulted in the release of detained civilians, a characterization of the operation that was technically neutral and practically significant. The Vorkai had spent 40 years building the galaxy's understanding of themselves as an unassailable power. The image of 9,000 humans walking out of a Vorkai facility behind soldiers wearing Earth's flag was doing something to that understanding, quietly and steadily, the way water does something to stone. High Lord Zarak received the intelligence report on the Dirac liberation. At the same time, he received the latest status update from the Ninth Fleet, which was now 18 hours from the human border sectors. He also received a communication from 3 of his client species requesting clarification on the current military situation, which was not a thing that client species normally requested, because client species of the Dominion did not normally need to request clarification. The clarity was usually provided by the unambiguous evidence of Dominion power. Client species asked for clarification when they were no longer completely certain that evidence was reliable. Zarak read the communications. He looked at the footage from Dirac that his intelligence team had captured before the Vorkai signal-blocking effort had fully engaged. He watched humans walking out of a facility that his administration had run for 9 years. He watched the expression on their faces, not triumph. Most of them, not the expression he would have expected from a species celebrating a military victory. Just the careful, exhausted expression of people who were taking their first real breath in a very long time. He watched that for a while. Then he closed the footage and turned to his military council. "Proceed with the Ninth Fleet deployment," he said, "and send a message to the human admiral. Tell her that we have 17 additional facilities housing human prisoners across Dominion space. Tell her that if her fleet advances beyond the current position, those facilities will be secured immediately under emergency protocol." Emergency protocol was the phrase used in Dominion administrative language for the process of terminating biological assets before they could be liberated by an external force. He watched his council members as he said it. Most of them registered the order and began working on its implementation without visible reaction. But Vec, the civilian administrator who had spoken in the last council meeting, did not immediately begin working. He sat very still for a moment, his eyes focused somewhere that was not the room. "Administrator Vec," Zarak said. Vec looked up. "Yes, High Lord, you have something to say." Vec was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am concerned that the emergency protocol response to the Dirac liberation will not have the strategic effect that." "The strategic effect," Zarak said, "is that the human commander will stop her advance rather than have her people killed. That is the standard response to this type of species resistance. It has worked 43 times. It has worked with species that were not already broadcasting their military operations on the open galactic network," Vex said carefully. "With a species that other powers are now watching." Zarak looked at him. "The other powers watching are our clients," he said. "They will not act against us." "They are watching," Vex said, "to determine whether they should continue to be our clients." The silence that followed was very different from the silences that had preceded it in the council chamber. Zarak looked at Vec for a long time. Then he looked away. "Send the message," he said. "Proceed as ordered." And across Dominion space, 17 facility commanders received the emergency protocol order and began preparing for what it required. But somewhere in the chain of transmission, in the 18 hours between the order being sent and the Ninth Fleet arriving at the human border, Park Sion received the message. She read the threat. She read it carefully and completely. She did not look frightened. She looked, for exactly 4 seconds, like someone doing a calculation of tremendous importance at very high speed. Then she began issuing orders, and the orders were not the orders of someone who had been stopped. The order Park Sion issued in the 4 seconds after reading the Vorkai's emergency protocol threat was not what any of her advisors expected. She did not order a halt. She did not begin negotiation. She did not redirect her fleet assets away from the facilities to avoid triggering the protocol. She ordered all 17 remaining prisoner facilities to be hit simultaneously, within the next 4 hours, before the Vorkai's emergency protocol teams could complete their preparations. It was the most dangerous order she had given in 10 years of dangerous decisions. 17 facilities across Vorkai space. Most of them were in defended positions. Her available fleet assets were already stretched across 3 active engagement zones. The math of putting enough ships at 17 points simultaneously, in 4 hours, without depleting any engagement zone so badly that it became vulnerable, was the kind of problem that her tactical planning team had been running quietly in background simulations for 6 months, without ever being told directly why they were running it. They had run it because she had known this moment was coming. Not the exact shape of it, not the exact timing, but the principle of it, that the Vorkai would eventually reach for the hostages, because that was the documented response, because it had worked 43 times, and so she had planned for the day it would not work a 44th. All available fast strike assets, she said to her fleet coordination team. Every ship not currently in a committed engagement. I want 17 simultaneous assault formations at these coordinates. 4 hours. Tell them they do not wait for confirmation. They do not wait for updated intel. They go now. Her senior tactical officer pulled up the asset availability readout. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Admiral, if we pull fast strike assets from the northern engagement zone, the Ninth Fleet. The Ninth Fleet is going to have a problem in the northern engagement zone regardless, Sion said. Because in 4 hours I am taking the Unyielding and the primary fleet to Vorkai Prime. The room was very still. We are not waiting for the Ninth Fleet to come to us, she said. We are going to them, past them. We are going to the home system. She had not planned to go to Vorkai Prime this early. The original timeline had that move as the final stage. The culminating action, after months of attrition, had reduced the Dominion's military response capacity to a level where the home system assault would be decisive without being catastrophically costly. She had planned it for later because a premature move on Vorkai Prime, if it failed or if her fleet was badly damaged in the approach, would undo everything. But Zarak had changed the calculation by threatening 43,000 people, and Sion had made her career by being the person who updated her calculations faster than the enemy expected. Commander Kong Ji-hoon received her transmission 6 minutes after she gave the order. He read it on the bridge of the Unyielding, which was currently in orbit above Dirac, overseeing the continued evacuation of freed prisoners. She's going to Vorkai Prime, his communications officer said, in the tone of someone who was simultaneously reporting a fact and asking a question about their own emotional response to it. Yes, Ji-hoon said. Yes, Ji-hoon said again. He looked at the tactical display. The simultaneous 17 facility operation was already beginning to appear as fleet movement on the strategic map. Fast strike groups burning hard toward their assigned coordinates, racing the clock. He watched them for a moment. Have the last prisoner transports cleared the surface? He asked. 30 minutes, sir. Then we join the Admiral, he said. Get the fleet ready to move. The 17 simultaneous facility operations were not clean. 4 of them went perfectly. The strike teams arrived before any preparation for emergency protocol had begun. The guards surrendered quickly, and the prisoners were out, before anything terrible could happen. 7 more went hard, fighting, casualties on both sides, buildings breached and entered under fire. 3 of the facilities had begun emergency protocol procedures when the strike teams arrived, and the strike teams got inside in time to stop those procedures at a cost of lives that Ji-hoon would read about later in the casualty reports and that Sion would read about at the same time, alone in her quarters, without anyone present. 2 facilities were not reached in time, 412 people. Sion read that number in the report. She held it in the way that people in command hold the worst numbers, not setting them aside, not absorbing cleanly, but keeping them visible. Because visible things can be accounted for, and accounted for things cannot be used to pretend that a decision did not cost what it cost. She had known the simultaneous operation would not be perfect. She had known it would cost lives. She had made the decision anyway because the alternative, waiting, negotiating, giving Zarak time to complete the emergency protocol across all 17 facilities, would have cost far more. The math was right. The math being right did not make the 412 into something else. She filed the report. She went back to work. The approach to Vorkai Prime took 21 hours. The Ninth Fleet, now stranded in a defensive response to the 17 simultaneous operations and unable to regroup in time to intercept the primary human fleet, sent warnings and threats ahead of Sion's approach. 3 defensive picket lines tried to engage her fleet and were pushed aside with losses that would have been severe in an earlier phase of the war, but now, with phase disruptors standard across her fleet and her crews battle-hardened from 2 weeks of continuous engagement, were manageable. When the human fleet entered Vorkai Prime's outer system, the planet's orbital defenses activated. They were significant. Rings of fixed-gun platforms, 6 system defense ships, and an emergency planetary shield that covered the inhabited zones. Sion did not try to break through the planetary shield. She did not try to destroy the defense platforms. She set her fleet in a complete encirclement of the system, and then she waited, and she broadcasted. She used the same galaxy-wide network that she had used for the Dirac liberation. She opened every channel. She transmitted to every frequency, and she spoke directly to the Vorkai people, bypassing their military command entirely, in their own language, in simple and clear language that did not threaten and did not beg, that simply explained, with evidence, what had happened and what was now true. She told them that their fleet had been defeated in engagement after engagement. She provided the battle data ship by ship. She told them about the Helix Corridor, about the border sectors, about the 7th War Fleet. She showed them the footage from Dirac. She showed them, without editorializing, what their facilities had looked like from the inside. She told them that humanity had no desire to destroy their world or harm their civilian population. She said that humanity had one requirement, that the submission accords be dissolved, that all human prisoners be released, and that the Dominion's military forces stand down. And then she said something that nobody in the Vorkai Council chamber expected her to say. She said that if those requirements were met, the human fleet would withdraw from Vorkai Prime and a permanent diplomatic channel would be established. No further military action, no occupation, no terms designed to humiliate. The Dominion could keep its space, its economy, its government. What humanity required was to be left alone, to be recognized legally and formally as what they had always been. Not prey, not assets, people. She gave the council 48 hours to respond. High Lord Zarak received the broadcast in the council chamber. He watched his council listen to it. He watched their faces as the battle data appeared. Ship by ship, engagement by engagement, a complete accounting of the past 2 weeks that left no room for minimization or favorable interpretation. He watched Administrator Vek's face in particular. Vek was a politician, which meant his face was usually carefully controlled. Right now, his face said things that Vek had not authorized it to say. When the broadcast ended, Zarak spoke before anyone else could. "We will not respond to ultimatums from a prey species," he said. "We will rebuild the 7th Fleet and High Lord," Vek said. "Do not, High Lord." Vek's voice was steady. It was the steadiness of someone who has decided that the cost of speaking is now less than the cost of not speaking. "We have lost over 200 ships in 2 weeks. We have lost 12 defensive positions, 3 monitoring stations, and a major prisoner facility. 3 client species have requested diplomatic consultations that they would not be requesting if they were confident in our position. The 9th Fleet is currently deployed in a reactive posture. That means it cannot reach Vorkai Prime in time to affect any engagement the human fleet initiates here." He paused. "And the human fleet commander has offered terms that allow us to end this without losing anything, except what we should not have taken." The chamber was very quiet. "They were prey," Zarak said, but his voice was different. Something in it had changed in a way that the council could hear. "They were not," Vek said. "We were wrong. The classification was wrong. The classification was always wrong. We simply never had evidence compelling enough to force us to admit it." Zarak looked at him for a long time. He looked at the other council members. He looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet encircling his home system. He looked at the footage from Dirac, which was still running on one of the secondary screens. He sat down. He sat down in a way that communicated something large and final. "Convene the legal authority," he said quietly. "Begin the process for treaty revision." Ambassador Li Jian sat at the head of the negotiating table. It was not the same table where the submission accords had been signed 10 years ago. It was a table on a neutral orbital station in the space between human and Vorkai territory, a location selected by Sioyan's team specifically because it was not in Vorkai space and not in human space. The symbolism was intentional. This was not a meeting on anyone's territory. This was a meeting between equals. For 10 years, Li Jian had sat in rooms with the Vorkai and smiled and spoken carefully and never let them see the thing that lived behind her eyes. She did not need to do that anymore. She sat in her chair with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at the Vorkai delegation across from her, led not by Zarak, who had sent representatives, which itself said everything, and she was simply herself. She did not perform calm. She was calm. After 10 years of the performance, the real thing was very easy. The treaty took 6 days to negotiate. It was 41 pages long. It dissolved the submission accords entirely. It established formal diplomatic relations between Earth and the Vorkai Dominion under a framework that recognized both parties as sovereign political entities with equal standing under galactic law. It required the immediate release of all remaining human prisoners in Vorkai detention, 11,822 people, who would be transported to human-controlled space over the next 90 days. It required the Vorkai to pay reparations to be distributed through a joint human galactic oversight body. And it prohibited the Vorkai Dominion, in language that Li Jian wrote herself and that she had been composing in her head for 10 years, from ever again classifying any species as prey. It was signed on a Thursday morning, local station time, in the presence of observers from 7 species, 3 of whom were former Vorkai client states that had requested participation as a first step toward their own renegotiation of their relationship with the Dominion. Li Jian signed for Earth. She used the same pen she had carried for 10 years. A plain metal pen she had bought from a market stall in Seoul the morning before she flew out to begin her posting as Earth's diplomatic envoy to the Vorkai. She had bought it because it was inexpensive and reliable. She kept it because she wanted to sign something with it one day that was worth the wait. Commander Kang Ji-hoon spoke to the galaxy from the bridge of the ESV Unyielding, still in orbit above Durak, where the last transport ships were loading the final freed prisoners. His address was short. He had not wanted to give a speech at all. Seo-yeon had told him that someone needed to, and that it should be him, and when Seo-yeon told him something in that particular voice, he had learned not to argue. He stood in front of the camera for a moment without speaking. He was thinking about the cold of a moon he did not want to remember, and the weight of 3 years, and a facility nothing like the one below him, but close enough in feel that the similarity was something he carried in his chest. He thought about Shin Bomi, who was currently on a transport headed back to Earth for the first time in 13 years. He thought about 412 people. He spoke. 10 years ago, he said, a very powerful empire looked at human beings and decided we were prey. They decided this because they were strong and we appeared weak. They decided this because, at that specific moment, the evidence supported their conclusion. And then they acted on their conclusion immediately, because they did not think we would have time to change the evidence. He paused. They gave us 10 years, he said. We used them. He looked directly into the camera. His face was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was something quieter than either of those things. The face of someone who has finished something very long and very hard and is still deciding what to feel about the fact that it is finished. We are not a species that breaks, he said. We have been told we are small. We have been told we are weak. We have been told what we are by people with very large ships and very long records of being right. We spent 10 years listening to that and preparing our answer, and today the answer is complete. He straightened slightly. Humanity is not prey, he said. We never were. The galaxy knows that now. He ended the transmission. Behind him, through the bridge's viewport, the last transport ship lifted away from the surface of Durak, carrying the last of the people who had been left there, and climbed steadily toward the waiting fleet and the long road home.